Hi, I am Sophia. Welcome to True Payback, where story hits different. Hit subscribe. Let's dive in.
The first thing Michelle said when I walked into the conference room at Hartley and Associates was not hello. It wasn't even a look of acknowledgement. It was a declaration. She has no business being in this meeting. She said it to my Aunt Roberta, but she said it loud enough for all 11 people in that room to hear. My Uncle Douglas. My cousins Marcus and Bree. 3 of Grandpa's longtime friends who had been invited as witnesses. And the estate attorney, Gerald Hartley, who had the grace to pretend he hadn't heard it. I set my bag down at the far end of the conference table, took the chair closest to the door and said nothing. Michelle was already seated at the head of the table, Grandpa's usual chair, the one with the leather arms, with a printed copy of what she claimed was the most recent version of the will in front of her. She had highlighted it in yellow. She had brought her own pen. She never contributed to a single one of the properties, Michelle continued, arranging her papers. Not one. Grandpa took care of her because she was family. That's it. Aunt Roberta nodded. Uncle Douglas looked at the table. I pulled out my phone under the table and opened my message thread with Darius Cole, my corporate accounts manager at Whitmore Capital Group. I typed 6 words. And all contracts with Sterling Media Group. Effective immediately. I pressed send, set my phone face down on the table and waited for Gerald Hartley to begin. My grandfather, Leonard Earl Whitfield, built his rental portfolio the same way he built everything else in his life. Quietly, methodically, and without asking anyone's permission. He started with one duplex in Clearwater, Florida in 1981. He was 32 years old, working days at a shipping company and nights doing electrical work for a contractor friend. He bought that duplex with $14,000 in savings and a loan he paid back in 4 years. Then he bought another. Then another. By the time I was born, he owned 8 properties across Clearwater and St. Petersburg. By the time I was 10, he had 12. Most people in the family thought of Grandpa Leonard as a landlord. A successful one, yes. The kind who drove a clean truck and never wore a suit but somehow always had cash when it mattered. But the scale of what he had quietly assembled wasn't something many people in the family truly understood, because Grandpa Leonard didn't talk about money at the dinner table. He talked about weather and fishing and whether the Rays would ever win a World Series. I understood it because he taught me. Started when I was 14. He began bringing me along when he collected rent, showed me how to read a lease agreement, explained the difference between a cash flow property and an appreciation play. By the time I was 17, I was managing his maintenance schedules. At 19, he had me reviewing tenant applications. When I was 22, working my first real job as a junior analyst at a commercial real estate firm in Tampa, he called me one afternoon and asked me to come over. He was sitting at his kitchen table with 2 folders and a cup of coffee. I want to talk to you about what happens to all of this when I'm gone, he said. I told him not to talk like that. He gave me the look he always gave when he thought I was being sentimental. Sit down, Callie. I sat down. Over the next 2 hours he walked me through everything. All 14 rental properties. The LLCs he had structured each one under. The combined appraised value, which was, at that time in 2019, approximately $4.1 million. The annual net income after expenses, which was running at roughly $186,000 per year. And a trust document he had drafted with Gerald Hartley 6 months earlier, which he had not told anyone else in the family about. I'm putting it all in here, he said, tapping the trust folder. In your name. Irrevocable. Gerald's already filed the transfers. I stared at him. Grandpa, your cousins are good people, he said. Marcus works hard. Bree means well. But neither of them has ever asked me a single question about these properties that wasn't about what they'd be worth someday. He paused. Michelle has been taking money out of the Pinellas Street accounts for 3 years. I know it. I haven't said anything because she's Roberta's daughter and Roberta has enough grief. But I've been watching. He looked at me steadily. You're the only one who ever wanted to learn what I built. Not what it was worth. What it was. He closed the folder. So it's yours. All of it. Has been since March. I drove home that night and sat in my apartment for a long time without turning on the lights. What he had given me wasn't just property. It was the architecture of a life. 17 years of careful decisions, each one laid precisely on top of the last, designed to outlast him. He had spent 2 decades building something that could survive without him, and he had chosen me to carry it forward. That knowledge sat in my chest like something heavy and warm at the same time. I called him the next morning and told him I understood. That I would take care of it. That I would take care of all of it. He said, "I know you will. That's why I didn't have to ask." In the 4 years between that conversation and the morning of the inheritance meeting, I told exactly 2 people about the trust. The first was my best friend and business partner, Simone, who I had been quietly building a real estate management company with since 2020. We called it Whitfield Property Group, named for Grandpa, and we had grown it from a 2-person operation managing 6 units to a company with 4 employees, a Tampa office lease and contracts managing 31 residential units across Hillsborough and Pinellas counties. Grandpa's 14 properties were the foundation. Everything else we had built around them. The second person I told was Darius Cole, my accounts manager at Whitmore Capital, who handled the investment accounts I had been building since my first year at the real estate firm. I needed him to understand the full picture of my asset base. No one else knew. Not because I was strategic about it in any calculating way. Mostly because Grandpa had asked me not to say anything until the estate was settled, and I respected that. He was a private man. He had built everything he had without announcements and he wanted the transfer handled the same way. But there was also a simpler reason I hadn't said anything. My cousin Michelle Tran, née Whitfield, Aunt Roberta's oldest daughter, had been the family's golden child since before I could remember. She was 4 years older than me, had graduated from the University of Florida with a marketing degree, and had launched her firm, Sterling Media Group, in 2016. The firm had done well, mostly on the strength of 2 large corporate accounts she had landed early. The family talked about her the way families talk about the member who got out and made something of themselves. What the family didn't know, what I had slowly pieced together from Grandpa's records after he gave me access to the property management accounts, was that Sterling Media Group's success was significantly subsidized. Michelle had been managing the rental income collections for the Pinellas Street properties since 2018. 4 units. Combined monthly rent of $8,400. Her arrangement with Grandpa was that she would collect, handle minor tenant communications, and deposit to the property LLC account. In exchange, he paid her a management fee of $600 a month. What she had actually been doing was depositing partial amounts and redirecting the difference. The shortfalls were small at first. A few $100s a month. Easy to attribute to late tenants, minor repairs, administrative costs. But over 48 months, the pattern was unmistakable. I had handed the transaction records to a forensic accountant named Victor Reyes in January, 2 months before Grandpa passed. Victor had been thorough. His report was in my bag when I walked into Hartley Associates that morning. Michelle didn't know that. Grandpa Leonard died on a Tuesday morning in March at home in his own bed, the way he had always said he wanted to go. He was 74. His doctor said his heart simply stopped. There was no struggle. The family gathered at Aunt Roberta's house that evening. Michelle arrived with printed agendas. I don't mean that metaphorically. She had actually printed a single-page document titled, Estate Planning Next Steps, and placed a copy at every seat at the dining room table before dinner was served. It outlined a proposed timeline for the will reading, a suggested meeting with Gerald Hartley, and at the bottom, a note that she had already spoken with a property management firm about transitioning the rental portfolio to professional administration. I read mine twice. I set it down and went to find my mother in the kitchen. "Did you see this?" I asked. My mother glanced at the page. "She's just trying to be organized." I put the page in my bag and went back to the table. Over the following 2 weeks, as the family moved through the formal processes of death, the obituary, the service, the reception, the thank you calls, Michelle positioned herself as the estate's de facto administrator. She scheduled the meeting with Gerald Hartley. She collected the family's availability. She drafted the guest list for the inheritance meeting, which was how she described the will reading in every group message she sent. She did not include my name in the original draft. Aunt Roberta added me, according to a separate message she sent me privately. "Of course you should be there, sweetheart. Grandpa loved you." I thanked her and confirmed I would attend. Michelle's response to the updated guest list was a single reply to the thread. "Fine." The night before the meeting, I sat at my kitchen table with 3 folders. The first was the irrevocable trust document, filed with the Pinellas County Clerk of Court in March 2019 and transferring all 14 properties, held across 6 LLCs, to my name as sole beneficiary and controlling trustee. Gerald Hartley had a copy. I had a copy. The county records office had the originals. The second folder contained the operating statements for Whitfield Property Group for the previous fiscal year. Revenue, expenses, net income, portfolio valuation. I wasn't planning to use it. I brought it because Simone had suggested I bring everything. The third folder was Victor Reyes's forensic accounting report. 41 pages. Executive summary on page 1. Supporting transaction records organized by month, property, and account. A summary table on page 3 showing $293,000 in redirected rental income across 48 months, broken down as follows. $6,100 per month average diversion, routed through 2 intermediary accounts before being deposited to a business account registered to Sterling Media Group, LLC. I had read the report 4 times. I knew every number. I called Simone at 9 that evening. "You ready?" she asked. "I think so." "You don't have to do anything dramatic," she said. "Just let Hartley run the meeting. The documents speak for themselves." "I know. And Callie." She paused. "Whatever she says when you walk in, just sit down. Don't react." "I know," I said again. I placed all 3 folders in my bag, set my bag by the door, and went to bed. I did not sleep well, but not because I was nervous. I kept thinking about Grandpa's kitchen table. About the way he had laid the 2 folders side by side without ceremony, the way he explained things, not to impress but to transfer. He had spent his whole life building something and then spent one afternoon making sure it wouldn't disappear when he did. I thought about how few people ever had someone believe in them that completely, and what it meant to be trusted with something that large. By morning I was ready. Gerald Hartley called the meeting to order at 10 a.m. He was a careful man, Gerald, 60 years old, deliberate in his speech, the kind of attorney who never raised his voice because he never needed to. He had represented my grandfather for 22 years. He set his own folder on the table, removed his glasses, cleaned them, replaced them, and looked around the room. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to make clear that this meeting has a specific procedural scope. We are here to discuss the distribution of Leonard Whitfield's estate as documented in his final will and testament, dated November 2022, and to address certain related matters pertaining to property holdings that predate the will." Michelle looked up from her highlighted copy. "What does that mean, related matters?" "It means there are several items we need to address in sequence," Gerald said pleasantly. "I'll ask everyone to hold questions until I've completed the initial presentation." Michelle sat back. She looked confident. She had done the work, attended the meetings, positioned herself correctly. She had her highlighted will. She had her printed timeline. She was 4 years older than me and had a marketing firm and a good car and the full confidence of a woman who had never once considered that the ground beneath her might not be solid. Gerald opened his folder. The will, as drafted in November 2022, addresses Leonard's personal property, vehicles, financial accounts held in his individual name, and personal effects. The total value of these assets is approximately $312,000. He paused. The will does not address the 14 rental properties previously held across 6 LLCs under the Whitfield Property Group structure, because as of March 14, 2019, those properties were no longer part of Leonard's estate. The room was quiet. Michelle's pen stopped moving. In March 2019, Gerald continued, Leonard executed an irrevocable trust transfer conveying all 14 properties and their associated LLC interests to a sole named beneficiary. The transfer was recorded with the Pinellas County Clerk of Court and has been legally effective since that date. He looked up. The properties have been under the beneficiary's management and control for the past 4 years. Uncle Douglas leaned forward. Who's the beneficiary? Gerald looked down the table at me. The room turned. Michelle turned last. She looked at me the way people look at something they are trying to reclassify, searching for the version of events that still made sense. That's not possible, she said. Her voice was flat. I have the filed documentation here, Gerald said. As does Ms. Whitfield. I opened my bag and placed the trust folder on the table. I did not slide it toward her. I did not open it dramatically. I simply set it down. She was 25, Michelle said louder now. Grandpa wouldn't have, she never managed a single, Michelle? Aunt Roberta's voice was quiet. She was managing the properties, I said. It was the first time I had spoken since the meeting began. All of them. Since 2020. You were managing the Pinella Street collections. I took over direct management of those 4 units in January of this year, when I retained a forensic accountant to review the income records. The word forensic landed in the room like something dropped from a height. I reached into my bag and placed Victor's report on the table. Victor Reyes completed his review in February, I said. His findings are in the report. $293,000 in redirected rental income across 48 months. Average diversion of approximately $6,100 per month. The funds were routed through 2 intermediary accounts before being deposited to a business account registered to Sterling Media Group. The silence that followed was complete. Michelle's phone, face up on the table beside her highlighted will, lit up. A call. She ignored it. It stopped. Then it rang again. That's a lie, she said. But her voice had changed. The confidence was gone. What was left sounded like calculation, like someone running numbers in their head and not liking the sum. The transaction records are in the appendix, I said. Pages 9 through 37. Her phone rang a third time. She picked it up, looked at the screen and set it face down. Gerald cleared his throat. I've reviewed Mr. Reyes's report and shared it with a colleague in our litigation division. Given the scope of the findings, we've also been in contact with the Pinellas County State Attorney's Office. An investigator reached out to our office yesterday to confirm the documentation. Michelle stood up. This is not, she stopped. Sat back down. Her phone rang again. She looked at it. I need to take this. We're in the middle of a meeting, Uncle Douglas said. She answered it anyway. Whatever she heard made the color leave her face so completely that Aunt Roberta reached across and touched her arm. Michelle pulled her arm away. She ended the call and set her phone on the table. Her hands were not quite steady. That was my business manager, she said quietly. He says we lost the Donovan Brands account. She paused. And the Meridian account. I said nothing. I had sent that text to Darius 40 minutes ago. Whitfield Property Group was not a small client of Sterling Media Group. We had been their largest retainer for 2 years, $3.1 million in managed contracts, representing 60% of their annual revenue. I had not told Michelle we were a client. We had structured the engagement through a holding company name. She looked at me. I looked back at her. You did this, she said. I manage my business relationships, I said, the same way you managed Grandpa's. Gerald stepped in. I think it would be appropriate at this point to take a short recess. I have some procedural matters to discuss with Ms. Whitfield privately, and I'd encourage everyone to. I want to see that report, Michelle said. I pushed it across the table. She opened it to page 3. She read the summary table. She turned to page 9 and stopped. Her jaw tightened. She turned another page. Another. She closed the report. She looked at her mother. Aunt Roberta was looking at the table. Roberta, Michelle said. Aunt Roberta did not look up. The recess lasted 40 minutes. Gerald spoke with Michelle and her hastily reached phone attorney in the hallway. I sat in the conference room with Marcus and Bree, who had not said a word since Gerald had announced my name as beneficiary. Marcus was looking at his phone. Bree was looking at the wall. Simone called me at 10:52. I stepped into the hallway on the opposite end from where Michelle was standing. Darius confirmed the contracts are terminated, Simone said. Sterling's business manager has already called twice asking if there's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't, I said. I know. She paused. How are you doing? I thought about it honestly. I'm okay. Good. Call me when you're done. When the meeting resumed, Gerald outlined the next steps with the precision of a man who had clearly done this before. The personal estate, $312,000, would be distributed per the will, divided in thirds among my mother, Aunt Roberta, and Uncle Douglas as Leonard had specified. The 14 properties as assets of the irrevocable trust were not subject to the will at all. They were mine, had been mine since 2019 and would remain mine. As for the forensic report, Gerald confirmed that Victor Reyes had already been contacted by an investigator from the state attorney's office, and that Michelle would be required to provide documentation and testimony. A formal notice had been issued that morning. The process would take time, these things always did, but the direction was clear. Michelle signed 3 documents before she left. I don't know exactly what they contained. Gerald handled that part without me in the room. She walked past me in the lobby without speaking. Her phone was pressed to her ear. Her highlighted copy of the will was still on the conference table that I drove to Grandpa's house that afternoon. It was a Tuesday, the same day of the week he had died 2 months before. The house was a 3-bedroom on a quiet street in Clearwater, the one property he had never put into an LLC because he said it wasn't an investment, it was a home. It was part of the personal estate now, bequeathed to my mother and her siblings to sell or keep as they decided. I let myself in with the key I had always had and sat in the kitchen for a while. The folders were on the table where he always left things, a habit I had inherited from him without noticing. I had spent so many hours at this table, reviewing leases, going over vacancy rates, learning to read a cap rate like it was a story rather than a number. I thought about what he had said the night he showed me the trust documents. You're the only one who ever wanted to learn what I built. Not what it was worth. What it was. I had thought about that sentence 100 times in the 4 years since. I had turned it over the way you turn over something you want to understand fully before you set it down. I understood it now. 6 weeks after the inheritance meeting, the state attorney's office filed formal charges against Michelle Tran for grand theft and fraudulent misappropriation. Specifically, $293,000 in rental income diverted from 6 Whitfield Property LC accounts between 2018 and 2022. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea. The process, as Gerald had said, would take time. Sterling Media Group filed for bankruptcy protection 8 weeks after the inheritance meeting. The loss of our contracts had been the fracture point. 3 other clients had followed when the story moved through the Tampa business community in quiet, professional whispers. Aunt Roberta called me once about a month after everything. She didn't ask me to intervene or soften anything. He said she was sorry. She said she hadn't known, and I believed her because my grandfather had believed her. She asked if we could have lunch sometime. I said yes. Whitfield Property Group opened a second office in St. Petersburg in the fall. We took on 4 additional properties under management, none of them family-related, and ended the year with 11 full-time employees. I put Grandpa's photo on the wall of the conference room. He would have found that sentimental. I kept it there anyway. The 14 properties continued to run the way he had built them, carefully, quietly, and without asking anyone's permission. I collected the rent. I reviewed the leases, kept the books clean. I was, after all, the one who had wanted to learn what he built. Not what it was worth. What it was.